In this video, we're going to take a look at Diamine Tobacco Sunburst. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion. In general, this is a great looking brown, but when it doesn't look good, it is bad. I like the tone variation that this ink gives out of the pens. It's really neat how it gives a great tone from a fine pen, and it gets darker and darker as the nib gets broader or pen gets wetter, which you could expect, but not all inks do that, and this one does it very well. And shading, oh yeah, you're gonna get a lot of very nice shading. So if you like shading brown inks, this is certainly a winner. Now, I didn't put it out on video with the pen review, but I did notice that on the back of the page with that Moramon Nemesine notebook, that it did get very deep into the page. So it can be a little aggressive on some papers, sometimes while you're using it, especially if you're using it with a gusher of a pen like I was with the Neponset. So it's just something to be aware of. Not that it's something that's really going to stand in your way with this ink. It looks so good, and I always enjoy being able to have a great looking brown ink because so many people don't use it, and it gives that very classic feel to everything you write. The only, wow, I don't even know that I can come up with I don't like it other than on bad paper. I like to change things up by using a different pen each day. Today that pen is a Noodler's Neponset with a music nib. It's inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. To see how I arrived at that opinion, let's take a look at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. Looking at the fine nib, we get no feather, no spread. We get great shading all the way through it. One of the reasons I love brown inks is the personality that comes through in the writing. And this ink, tons of personality. The medium nib is darker than the fine with no feather, no spread, still great shading all the way through it. It looks so good. I don't even have to point it out. The broad nib is darker than the medium with no feather and no spread and still great shading. Now you get a huge majority of much darker writing on this paper, but you're still getting it. Just look at the beginning, look at the word daughter. The beginning of the D compared to the up and down stroke. The beginning of it is much lighter. The U in daughter is much lighter. The T in daughter is much darker than the whole rest of the word. It all looks just so good. Looking at the back of the page, we see that we get a normal amount of ghosting and no bleeding. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Hero 7035 with a fine nib, a Parker Jotter with a medium nib, a Kaweco Sport with a broad nib, The next writing sample is done on Leuchtterm 1917 paper. Looking at the fine nib, we get no feather, no spread, and we get very nice shading. Now, brown inks on cream paper, yes please. I really enjoy that combination in how they look. The shading with this is just made to look that much nicer with a non-white background. The medium is lighter than the fine, just a little bit lighter. It has no feather, it has no spread, it is shading very well. Look at the word almost. Very dark to much lighter to very dark. And it's constant as it does this. Now, the interesting thing for me is when I had to go back over the D in evidence as I was messing up writing to see if that spot's gonna bleed. The broad nib is darker than the medium with no feather, no spread, and it is shading quite a bit. Look at how and goes from darker to lighter to darker. Very nice. Same thing's going on with the temps and on and is and light. All the time, the shade, it's awesome. Now, I had some minor concerns when it came to being able to bleed when I backed up over a letter, but we see on the back of the page, we have a normal amount of ghosting and no bleeding. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The next writing sample is done on Moleskine paper. Looking at the fine nib, we have a very dark tone. This is dark like it was broad on the other papers. Now, we have no feathering, we have no spread, we are getting some shading. It's there. It's not as standout. It's not as standout as the broad on the other papers, but it is certainly there, and this is a byproduct of a more absorbent paper. The medium is much lighter than the fine. It has no feather, it has no spread, it only has a little bit of shading, really that light seasoning of shading throughout. The tone looks bad. It's on this paper, it absorbed in fast enough that it's not as good. All the light tone as the majority of the writing really doesn't suit for me. Where the broad is darker than the medium, it has no feather, no spread. The tone is much more pleasing to look at. It shades very well throughout all of this writing. Looking at the back of the page, we see a normal amount of ghosting and no bleeding. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. This smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. And here we see the results of the resistance test. The next writing sample is done in a composition notebook. Looking at the fine nib, we have no feather, no spread. We have a darker tone than we've normally gotten on the fines. Normally this is about what we were getting for mediums. It is shading some, not real stand out, but it's definitely there. You can see it in had and you can see it in Ben. It's adding some characteristic to this, but this paper I've known for sort of eating up a lot of that quality. I see this as a great paper when you're using blues and blacks a lot, or reds. Some of the other colors, it just doesn't do as well. The medium is much lighter than the fine. It's got kind of a baby poop tone to it. It's got no feather, no spread. It has 1 or 2 moments of shading. Nothing really great about it. The broad is about the same tone as the medium, that nice baby poop. No feather, no spread. It's got a little bit more shading in terms of spots that occur here than on the medium, but still, as a tone, this doesn't look especially pleasant for this, so I wouldn't use it in lab if I wanted to look back on my notes and not wonder what was in my pen. Looking at the back of the page, we see a normal amount of ghosting and no bleeding. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Diatramentis Nikola Tolstoy Khaki. Here is Monteverde Brown Sugar. Here is Papier Plume Caramel. Here is Roher and Klinger Sepia. The next writing sample is done in a Mead 5-star notebook. Looking at the fine nib, we have no feather, no spread, very dark tone, no shade. It's a nice dark brown. It looks good here. It just has lost some of what can look so good about this ink. The medium is even lighter than the fine, with no feather, no spread, a couple of moments of shading that are happening. You see it on the H of they, you see it on the H and the P's of happened. So it is there, and it's not bad. The tone here is certainly not what I would prefer. It's not quite that baby poop, but it's really getting there. The broad nib is the same tone as the medium, with no feather, no spread, almost no shading. There is a couple of spots. You see it on the HE of the. You see it in the dots or apostrophes, but that's largely it. Looking at the back of the page, we do get some heavy bleed into the paper, but it does not come through and touch the other side, and we have a normal amount of ghosting. While it's nice to find other inks in the same color family, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Here is a green ink by Jane their Vert Prix. Here is a blue ink by Jinhao Blue. Here is a pink ink by Levenger, their Pinkly. Here's a turquoise ink by Robert Oster, their Tranquility. If you'd prefer different complement colors, then there's links to those different playlists down in the description. Or you can click on my face. That'll take you to my channel page. Then click on the playlist tab. Scrolling down, you'll be able to see all of the playlists that are here on the channel. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. Looking at the fine nib, we get some feathering all over it, as you would expect with this paper. We get some spread, and actually a lot of spread, because that is a very fine. And it's getting pretty close to a medium here. We have no shading. Not a horrible tone of brown, though. Medium, we have a horrible tone of brown. Welcome to the baby poop. That has feathers in it. So I don't know what that baby was eating, that it has feathers in its poop, but this is what it would look like. It has some spread, not nearly as much as the fine. It has no shading whatsoever. Just a plain baby poop brown. The broad nib is the same tone as the medium. It feathers very consistently the whole way through. All through that baby poop is tons of feathers. Check your birds. There's some spread, but I don't see this as excessive considering the paper. We get no shading whatsoever. Just a hideous ink. Looking at the back of the page, we had nothing touch the page underneath, so that was really good. It does naturally go very deep into the paper, giving a lot of show through, a lot of ghosting, but no bleed that corrupts the page underneath. So what nib and pen do I think is going to give the best writing experience with this ink? This ink is largely a dealer's choice, depending on how dark you want it to be, and it will shade all the time. All huge bonuses, so the ink with the pens isn't the real controlling factor here. For this ink, the real control comes down to the paper. So if you like that feathery baby poop, you get it from cheap paper. And when people ask what's in your pen, don't tell them Tobacco Sunburst and ruin the good name of this ink. Tell them baby poop brown. That way, it will make sense. On any good paper or even half decent paper, then you can use any pen you want and it's going to look amazing. I hope you got something out of this video, and if you want to be able to follow me over on Instagram, I'm there as an ink guy. Thanks for watching.